Good morning, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you're watching the Muddy Waters Podcast. The Muddy Waters Podcast exists to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on here in the state of Maine, in order that we can be informed and make good decisions about who we vote for. Unfortunately, the mainstream media is not doing a good job telling us what's actually happening in our state, and that's why we've created this podcast. As I like to say, if they would just do their job and report on what's happening and extrapolate on why it's happening, things like the Muddy Waters Podcast would not be necessary. But unfortunately, this is the world in which we live, where mainstream media has become the propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. And so here we are trying to let you know better about what's going on, and not by my own rationality and insight, because I'm one person and I don't know everything. Instead, we try to bring on guests who have experiences and know what's going on from different places throughout the state. Sometimes they're legislators. And we've got somebody coming on in just a moment. But I also want to mention, I've said this a little bit before, we just rolled out some new merchandise for the podcast. You can find this on my X page. I need to put it a little bit higher up, but you can check out our merchandise on X, and there's a link to it, and see if there's anything that you want to do to be able to support the podcast and as a conversation piece, because part of the purpose in creating this content is so that people can share the content with other people to help the conversation. If we're going to win back our state, we need to win the information war, and this is a tool in that. So anything that we can do to engage in more conversation, more civil discourse with our friends, neighbors, all that kind of stuff, the better. And so, this is a great way for us to engage that conversation. So if you get time, go ahead and check out that stuff. And if you're interested, feel free to purchase and be able to contribute and help me lose less money on this podcast, and give yourself an opportunity to talk to somebody about the podcast. All right. So today, again, we have a Representative John Eder is joining us. Did I say it right? Is it Eder?
Yeah, that's right. Either way. People say it all sorts of different ways.
Yeah. Well, so thank you so much
for
coming on, John. I'm doing well.
I was just laughing. You were like, help me lose less money. I appreciate that, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of this stuff. Oh, good.
I was just going to say, like, the media landscape in Maine, like, I've said to people for the longest time, I like these organs that are out there, the papers. For the longest time, I thought they've got to be like funded by intelligence or something. Who reads these papers anymore? What is their circulation? Like, how do they stay afloat? And now it's all coming out with USAID. I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that our media here is like wholly funded by the government, And so I appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, and I appreciate what you do, because like being a representative, what district do you represent, first of all?
I represent District 136. It's Alfred, Waterboro, and Lyman over here in southern Maine. It's inland from Kennebunk.
Nice. Well, I really appreciate you representing us in Augusta. I've talked to a number of reps, and I know that it's very challenging to be there in Augusta, trying to speak sense with trying to convince the Democrats not to do things that we know that they're probably going to do anyway, and to go in and day out and basically get bludgeoned by them and have them win, and then all at the same time, because I feel like this needs to be commented on. There are so many people on the right that are just like, well, what are our legislators doing? And it's like, well, what can they do? The problem is that the Democrats will not negotiate. And so like you're in a place of like, kind of like not much that you can do. So I appreciate that you continue to go into the office and fight for us, knowing that it's largely a losing battle until we can take back over the legislature.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing, is the losing battle. So it works good for me. And I kind of grew up in the 80s in like New York City punk rock scene. And I feel like being a Republican is and I'm comfortable being in the minority, because I was there as a Green back in 2002. I was a party of one. I took a seat in Portland from the Democrats, and they kicked me around for a while, but you know, that's how I like it. I like to say the difficult things, and I just like to, you know, mess with the establishment. So it's pretty natural for me to be a Republican now. When I served in the legislature back when, in the early 2000s, you know, I saw how the Democrats treated the Republicans, and I was friendly with Republicans. I'd ride up and down with them, hang out with Republicans and Democrats alike. And I don't know, I just found the Republicans in the end, there's like they're a lot more fun. They're a lot more open-minded than, you know, the media makes out with all of the constant like charges of like racism and bigotry. And you know, I find that the your ability to be a free thinker is much more accepted in the Republican Party than it is in the Democratic Party, particularly these days. There used to
Yeah.
be some like blue dog Democrats back when, who were like anti-abortion Democrats, and so there was some, you know, there was some argument within their caucus, but now they're just like lockstep, you know, and so yeah, so being in the minority is, you know, what I've been doing all the while, and you know, I don't mind being a minority.
Yeah. Well, so you've got a really interesting story and you've kind of alluded to it here, but I want to give you some more opportunity to just kind of talk about your journey. Like, so you're not originally from Maine, and as you said, and I'll let you kind of tell it like you were starting to tell me before we went live. Like you came
Yeah.
and you were in the Green Party and you even got elected in the Green Party. So tell us like about that, and then you know, get to the place where eventually you become a Republican, because that's kind of a fun story. I think I really like in general. I just think people like coming to realizations and changing their mind, despite the fact that you know, there's this like negative, and if you do change your mind, people are going to call you a flip flopper and stuff like that. But I like to quote Winston Churchill, who at least in the movie Darkest Hour says at the end, he's like, those who don't change their minds or never change their minds never change anything. And so I think it's like seeing people kind of like you know, sometimes we on the right would say see the light, but I think that it's more complicated than that. But kind of shift to supporting a different party, especially one of the establishment parties, we'll say. Yeah. So yeah, just really be interested in especially again, this is what I was trying to say. Sorry, my brain sometimes gets in my own way, but it's like part of what helped Trump win in 2024 is the, you know, the coalition building and bringing big people in the Republican Party, especially being a big tent party, and that way, like, you know, somebody who was a Green and maybe still shares some of those values is able to be a part of the Republican Party, and so yeah, I just let you kind of tell your story, but that's why I'm excited to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really welcomed by the Republicans. Like I said, you know, that that kind of old trope of a big tent, I find it to be true.
Yeah.
And you know, there's been such a switch in the parties. You know, I think the party, you know, the Democrats are the party of Wall Street and pharma and the wealthy. And you know, I kind of, being an independent, having been a Green, and I'll get to that in a minute, but having been a Green all those years, and I was the highest elected Green in the country for a minute. You know, my thought was like both parties suck, you know, and so I wasn't married to any one party or the other. I'm pretty like issue based, yep. You know, and so it's been amazing to see what I think is like the Democrats are kind of like the Republicans that I grew up with in the 80s, you know, very command and control, do as I say, canceling people, going after people. That's the kind of being real rigid, being, you know, pro war all the time. That's the Republican Party of my father that I remember,
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
And so it's just been really interesting. I didn't imagine in my lifetime, and I'm 56 now, I didn't imagine in my lifetime that I would see this, you know, total shift. You know, it's like I've got my Make America Healthy Again shirt on, RFK Jr., and, you know, to see, and I'm also a big fan of Tulsi Gabbard. So to see these, like, this coalition that's come together of disaffected And to my mind, MAGA is just like when you've got like a political elite, this upper middle class and upper class political elite, millionaires and billionaires, they've gravitated to the Democratic Party, particularly on the local level. And yeah, so it's just like here we are now with this like kind of total polar shift in the parties, and it's a real cool thing to see. And this coalition building that Trump has done, to me is, you know, a, I'm here for it. I'm super excited. I had always wanted to see a convergence. I thought a convergence was coming between the left and the right. You know, I was a Green. I was a highest elected Green. I held a seat in Portland. My first work with the Green Party was working on the Nader campaign in 2000. Nader was running against Al Gore when it was Gore v. Bush, right? And Nader talked about this. He later left the Greens. He never was a Green. He was always an independent. But he talked about this coming together that he saw on the horizon of the left and right. And, you know, MAGA has just become a new word, to my mind, for an elite to kind of piss on the backs of the working class. That's been going on forever. Only now they've sort of allowed themselves this, and the media has helped out by maligning MAGA, which to my mind is just working people, right?
Yep.
You know, some college educated, some not. You know, they're always like going on Facebook about, I bet you don't have a college degree. You know, I have a couple, and a lot of Republicans do.
Yep.
You know, and so yeah, I'm here for it. It's I think there's a convergence of the left and right coming, and you know, talking about that Churchill quote and changing your mind. You know, not that I'm wise, but I think changing your mind is a sign of wisdom. You can always be taking in new information and finding out new things, and particularly on the local level, because I'm a very like ardent localist.
Yeah.
Particularly on the local level, I find that the Republicans now are like talking about stuff like glyphosate in your food and what they might be spraying in the air and health issues. And it's an amazing shift, you know, and you know, looking into the COVID shot and vaccines and so forth, and not being lockstep with the establishment and challenging these things. It's like, I would have thought that that was Democrat stuff back when I first joined the legislature. So to get to that, I was traveling around the country for years. I left home real young at 15, and I was like, tried college for a minute. And then in the 90s, I went traveling, riding on freight trains and hitchhiking around the country. And I came up to Maine to rake some blueberries. I rode up on my bike, and then I wound up in Portland somehow. And I had been around the country and seen a lot of people. I was doing a lot of activism around the country. That was my thing. And I'd seen friends, you know, kind of making things happen in their respective towns around the country. And I thought it was time for me to kind of try to put down some roots. And that's when the Greens, when I was working in the Nader office, they asked me to run for the legislature. And I was like, me, you know, okay, these guys are weird. You know, I was like, you know, kind of hippie vibe, and, you know, it worked for them. And they said, we've been running for the seat we've been priming this seat for a few years in the West End. We've been increasing our numbers every time we run. And now it's an open seat. They were running when it was, Mike Saxel was the former Speaker of the House, and he held the seat, Democrat. And so they said, hey, if you want to run, that'd be great. And I went door to door hard. Like it was, you know, it's an easy place to go door to door because, you know, everything's close together. And I just went door to door as a Green. You know, I laid it all out there, told people my background. And at that point, I was like, I was promoting like single payer health care, and something I would never want now, particularly after COVID. I don't want government healthcare at all, you know. But back then, I was talking to people and like, oh, it's cool to see you at the door. I haven't seen my Democratic Party rep at my door. I've been here for 30 years and nobody's ever come to talk to me. So people immediately resonated with me, sort of like applying for the job on their doorstep. I went and saw people, like I went around the district 4 different times, and and I didn't know if I would win. I was like, I also kind of took it as like a personal transformation thing, like talking to people in that way and really kind of, like I said, applying for the job and listening to people, like going into their apartments and sitting next to their cat box and listening, listening to all sorts of stories. And, and I won hard. I won like 3-1.
Wow.
And there I was, the highest elected Green in the country. And I joined the legislature 2002. And immediately when I got there, they were like, well, you're going to caucus with us, the Democrats, the majority party.
So,
and I was like, well, I don't think you have my best interest. How's that?
oh, I was just going to say, so they just told you that you were going to caucus with the Democrats. It wasn't like you were given a choice.
Yeah, that's what they said. You could use our legislative aids.
Okay.
I'm like, I don't really, I don't
Yeah.
think you have my best interest at heart. So I don't know. I even Ralph Nader, when I won, had sent me a box of books and his phone number. And I called him up and I said, hey, Ralph, can you help me with some fundraising? Because, I want to set up my own office because, the Democrats are asking me to caucus with them. And then he was like, oh, yeah, just do that. Caucus with them. That's what Bernie Sanders does. And then I was like, I don't know, Ralph. I don't think that's going to work. I just took a seat from them that they'd held forever for like 60 years, So I went head to head with the speaker, which, again, coming from my background, it's kind of weird. I'm in an office, sitting across from the Speaker of the House. And I'm like, I want my own office. We're a legitimate third party. We've had status for years now. And now we finally have a rep up here. So yeah, I want my own office. And at that point, because it was kind of a cool man bites dog story, the all the papers editorialized in favor. So it was kind of like in the court of public opinion. They were like, yeah, give him his office. So I got an office, down in the Cross Office building, and they gave me an aide for 1 day a week. My aide at that time was my friend who helped me out in my campaign, Ben Chipman, who later went on to win as an independent in Portland. Dude's a robot. And then he later, he really is. And then he later went and joined the Dems. And then I even ran as a Democrat back in 2000 and was it 18? There was a seat open. I was living in Biddeford with my wife and daughter at the time, and there was a seat open, and he was like, hey man, I'd really love to have you back up here again. And I thought, I don't want to be a Democrat, but I ran in the primary. I thought it would be a cool thing. I wanted to show my daughter the legislature, but she was really young at the time. So at the end, the whole thing just didn't feel right. I kind of pulled back on the reins, and I didn't win the primary. It was kind of self-inflicted error, and I didn't win in the primary. And so then COVID came about, and then my wife and I just had a daughter, and we were going slow on vaccines because, like, when I was a kid, you could I got like 5 vaccines. But then we were realizing every time we went to these well baby visits, it was vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. So we're like, oh, we're going to like pump the brakes on this. I didn't realize that they were giving kids like 72 shots at this point,
Yeah.
And so we pumped the brakes. We pumped the brakes on that. And then the whole issue with them removing the religious and philosophical exemptions came up. And then we lost that campaign to a referendum to overturn the Democratic pharma bill to make it so that you couldn't, philosophically or religiously refuse vaccines and still go to school.
Yeah.
So that really activated me. And then right after we lost that campaign, boom, COVID hit. That whole scam. And so then when I was looking around at like who was speaking out against any of this, it was all
Hmm.
Republicans. You know, some really brave Republican women, like the woman who held my present seat, Heidi Sampson, and she was speaking on the national level about this, one of the few voices out there. And I was like, I think I'm a Republican now. I told my wife, I'm like, we're gonna go be part of the solution. We were, independent. I was green, and then I was independent, and then I was Democrat for a minute. Went back to independent. By the way, the Democrats, when I was running for that seat in Biddeford, they sent staffers down to help my opponent because they didn't want this former Green. I had met with Ryan Fecto. He came, sat down, and talked to me. He's Speaker of the House right now, and it was clear he didn't like the cut of my jib. So, um,
Well, you
so
definitely don't give off the vibe of being somebody that can be controlled. Like like you've said multiple times that like a big part of who you are is like being a bit anti-establishment and not being underneath the thumb of anyone. And you pick your allegiances based on your values and views, not based on the fact that this is what the party says. So I can understand
yeah,
why Fecto was like,
yeah,
can I get somebody who will just be a yes man?
yeah. It's pretty
Yeah.
clear. When I thought about it afterwards, I'm like, oh yeah, that guy wouldn't want to have to deal with me. I uh, I grew up I grew up in like the punk rock movement in the '80s when I was a kid in New York City, and the club, the club kid scene, of the movie. And I always had this thing of like everybody's walking one way, I'm walking the other way. You know, when I was a kid in the '80s, like, me and my friends, we used to like, dress like punks and like gender bend and stuff like that. And, you would bleed for your music back then, going through the halls in the high school. It was like, it was a fight, to make it from A to B. And I loved it, and I had a lot of fun. And so my high school career, my academic career suffered. I ran away from home and left school when I was 15 and lived in the boys' home and tried college a bit. And then that's when I was traveling all throughout the 90s when I hit Portland. And yeah, man, that's, I, I have a punk ethos, and was really disappointed in all my old punk uh, heroes when they were all like down with the vaccine, and Rage Against the Machine became, Rage for the Vaccine. They were telling people how to get the vaccine before they came to their show. And, that was a great eye opener, and then seeing this polar shift with the parties where all the Republicans were, not all of them, but a bunch of particularly Republican women were speaking out, against big pharma and against the establishment. And yeah, so when Heidi Sampson, she was termed out here in my district, she and I were talking about a piece of legislation around COVID, around checking, asking the legislature to investigate the rise in all cause mortality. And at the end of that phone call, she said, "Hey, would you like to run for my seat?" And I said, "Oh, Heidi, I don't know." And I hung up the phone, and I asked my wife, and she was like, "If Heidi asked you, you got to do it. You got to run for that seat." I was like, "Oh man, not the legislature again." you
Yeah.
know, the legislature reminded me a lot of high school. And so I guess I keep redoing high school.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate that there are so many people that don't ever mature beyond high school level, and at so many levels in our society. It's I could tell a lot of fun stories, but but yeah, it's unfortunate that
Yeah.
that's the case. But doesn't surprise me all that much. I remember when I first started working, and I worked in banking for about 15 years, and I first started working there, and I was like, my first office felt a lot like a high school level drama. And it's it's pretty silly how adults behave. Yeah, we're older, but we're not necessarily more mature. hopefully, but
Yeah.
anyway, but yeah, so yeah, that's a really interesting, obviously, story. So Green Party to Independent to Dem, and now a Republican. What are the issues? Like, it sounds like your views on some issues anyway have shifted over the years, but obviously, being that you're a Green Party, you have a big concern about the environment, and being somebody who I'm assuming cares about the environment. Like, how do you like? How do you come to be into line, so to speak, with Republican views and values, or where are you at on that issue? Because obviously, I would say Wall Street and other things like that are pushing these green energy initiatives. And I'd be interested to hear your views on that for sure, as to like solar and wind and other things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got some thoughts on that. When I was there as a Green, I was introducing legislation that, the Democrats were not down with the environmental thing, really. Uh, another piece of my activism growing up was when I was a kid in the 80s. I saw, and amongst my friends, and I had friends who were gay. I had friends who were, trannies, and in the club scene and so forth. And so, people who like gender bent and that was the whole punk thing at the time. And so I was introducing legislation to support gay marriage. Democrats were not down with that. I was there on the environmental stuff like solar and wind. Democrats were not down with that. But it seems like everything they touch, they monetize, they bastardize, they turn into red meat, to stoke their base, and they corporatize it, and so that's what we're seeing now with the green energy stuff. It's a greenwash. They moved. I was doing environmental stuff around toxics, and they've got everybody. They got all of my friends in the environmental groups onto climate change, which is this really nebulous action point. Climate change, around the world, right? But of course, if the Democrats get a hold of everything, it becomes command and control. It becomes corporate, and this whole greenwash has gone on. I was part of a piece of legislation just like last week, where I was talking to this constituent, a geologist who does soil testing, and he was like, man, and he was a Democrat, and told him I was Republican, and he was like, well, I'm open-minded. I vote the person, not the party. And we got talking. He's like, I'm really curious about what's going on in the soil underneath these panels, because they break down and they have toxic chemicals in them. Are they turning these farmlands into brownfields? He's like, I'm real curious about that. So based on his conversation, I decided to introduce a piece of legislation. Reagan Paul, who's one of my colleagues, she had a very similar bill, so my bill was still in for drafting, and so I thought I'd kill my bill because we got a lot of bills, and we don't need to be making more laws and being duplicative. There's already thousands of duplicative laws out there on the books. So I got on her bill, and I asked this question from a real sincere point of view. I was like, so are we curious about what's going on underneath these panels? We know that when they break down, when they're completely at the end of their life, landfills don't want them. They don't know what to do with them. So along the way, right, because they're coming from China. Yep. So along the way to the end of their life, the industry says, oh, they're going to last 25 years. Well, but they're going to break down in the weather, particularly in Maine weather. They're going to break down quicker than that, and they're going to leach stuff into the soil. And I watched all the green groups get up and say, there's PFAS everywhere. There's toxics in the soil everywhere. I'm like, what? Here's a new industry, right? If that were a gas station,
yeah,
and like gas stations were new industry, you know, you would want to know what's going on in the soil around that new
Yep.
industry. I know that's your thing,
Right.
right? You're like you're watchdogs of like industry pollution and toxics. So you're not at all curious about these PFAS in the soil. So like I feel like they're captured, because it's become. I understand now that the lobbying from the solar and wind industry in Maine is like greater than that of big oil. So it's like, and same thing with pharma. So like pharma tells them, hey, we've got to. No kids can be in school without their vaccines, without 72 vaccines. So the Democrats take their marching orders from their paymasters, and they put in a bill to like now. How unconstitutional is that? That there are kids who can't go get an education because they don't want to take a corporate product because they have questions about what's in that product. And lo and behold, the Republicans now are interested in what's in these things. And
Yeah.
everybody saw the sausage get made during COVID, right? They all saw like, okay, that's how a vaccine gets made. And that one, of course, was like, ramped up what would have been 10 or 15 years. They did in a few years. And now they did in a few months. And now they're collecting that what they call post marketing data on the vaccine. They're what they would have captured in a 10 to 15 year study. They're letting people go on to the VAERS system and record their vaccine injury, which is a very difficult thing to do. And that's how they found out that kids were. We saw kids dropping dead on the courts,
Yeah.
on the basketball courts and in the fields, sporting fields around the country. And yep, lo and behold, they found post-marketing data in the VAERS system that it causes pericarditis, particularly in young men, myocarditis in young men, and they're still marching forward, like recommending the shot to 6-month-olds. I got a bill in that to stop promoting the vaccine, and like now basically like 80% of the country doesn't want to touch that thing because it's apparent to everybody. Everybody knows somebody who got hurt or injured. Personally, people talk to me about, how they don't feel the same ever since they got those shots. They're not going to get them again. And now the trust in public health, they threw all sorts of nurses out of the medical system
Yeah.
in Maine, a couple thousand
Including
people.
my mom.
And now Maine,
Yep.
oh,
Yep.
okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry to hear that. Well, tell her she's awesome for standing it
Yeah.
down. And then they turn around and hire traveling nurses who don't have to get the vaccine, who cost a lot more money. And now we have a healthcare
Well,
desert
and
in
and on
Maine.
top of that, so like they cost more money, but they're also, because I've experienced this, because in like I think it was 2020, yeah, it was 2022, because I was running for office. My dad had something happen and he was in the hospital, and I experienced the quality of care that you get from travel nurses. And this isn't every travel nurse, but here's the reality: somebody who's here for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is, and is then going to move on to somewhere else, is not going to have as much concern and care and do as good of a job in general. I'm sure there are studies that will prove this, but just conceptually, I think we understand if you're part of this community and you're going to have to answer for stuff long term, you're going to behave differently than somebody who's just here for 6 weeks and is going to move on. And so like I experienced and saw the difference in the quality of care and at the time where we had, that was, I think it was 2021, right? That all those nurses had been terminated. I think it was in October, maybe September. And this was in 2022 and they were still grappling with it. And so it's costing more. You ruin some people's careers, and the quality of care is down, all for something that, like, I mean, again, I use the example of my mom. I don't think she cares too much about me sharing that, but like she was a nurse for like 30 years, did a great job, never had any issues, no, like nothing came up. And now you're just going to let her go because she's supposedly some sort of a risk that she hasn't been for the past 30 years. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, and look at it now. All the hospitals are shutting down. How much of that is a factor? Of course, we know the Democrats don't pay the hospitals on time.
Right.
So now we're sitting in the middle of a healthcare desert, right? People in the far flung communities in Maine, how far do they have to drive to get some emergency care? They fired ambulance drivers,
Yeah.
so like now people have to wait like an hour plus for an ambulance to make it to their door. This so the echoes. And there was Janet Mills. She was all cool with taking the marching orders from the federal government, from the Biden administration, on shutting down all these businesses. How many businesses did we lose that she shut down? The healthcare system is completely in tatters. People like completely lost their faith in
Yeah.
healthcare and our public health agencies. And and then that brings me to, I mentioned about gay marriage. um, I supported that. I thought it was the right thing to do, and I still stand behind that. I saw friends die of AIDS, and talked to people who just wanted to, be able to go see their partner as they were dying, in the hospital. Sometimes, the parents of the partner didn't want you know, the other partner to come see them because they didn't agree with their lifestyle. That's all well and good, but I thought that was a legitimate reason. And but then what, and the Democrats were not down with gay marriage at the time, right? But then they take it over, and of course it's to monstrous proportions where now they want to trans your kid.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of and that's a pharma hookup too, because these kids are going to be medicalized for the rest of their lives. They're going to have shortened lifespans. It's like, and I remember some of the Republicans saying, when I was standing up and supporting gay marriage from the other side of the aisle at the time, because I was sitting with the Democrats, they were like, they're going to come for the kids. And I was like, they're not going to come for the kids. I know gay people. They're not, they just want to be married to one another. They're not interested in kids. But, the gay groups, they got the brass ring with gay marriage. They got everything they wanted. And believe me, I was there. I worked on all those referendums in the early 2000s, and I was there in those meetings, and they wanted nothing to do with trans people because that didn't fit the bill of Ozzie and Harriet and marriage. And back then we used to say people were born gay, right? And that was just, they're gonna love who they love, and they were born. Now that's out the window. The whole born gay conversation
Mm.
is out the window. But these gay groups, when they got the brass ring, they lost and their raison d'etre to continue to collect money and to keep their jobs.
Yep.
So then they focus up on the kids and trans, and so even if they did restore the religious and philosophical exemptions for vaccines, my daughter's not going to school so that somebody can confuse her about her gender, and then they can get involved and prescribe them drugs in these incoming healthcare centers, and tell me as a parent that I'm dangerous to my child if they can't give my child some gender affirming care drugs. And those gender affirming care drugs are coming in under the guise of reproductive health drugs. They have them labeled that way so they can hide all this from the parents. And we see articles in the paper all the time in Maine where, parents are finding out that they've been like socially transitioning their kid, giving them breast binders. And so they took this issue, gay marriage, Democrats, they monetize it, they turned it into something totally Frankenstein, and that's where we're at with this issue now. So
Well,
that's to talk about my evolution with these different issues
yeah.
around like the environment, gay marriage. That's what I've seen. I've seen it all happen in real time.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to hear you talk about how like the Democrats weren't on board, and sometimes I think a lot of people forget this. But I was doing some research into like Tulsi Gabbard actually back in I was just looking at her Wikipedia page, and what was interesting about her, I really like Tulsi too, and but in her early days, her and her dad, they were both Democrats, right? And she was in the state house in Hawaii, and initially when she was first in there, they were against gay marriage, and then they shifted and became pro gay marriage. And it's just, anyway, it's interesting that like the Democrats want to, they resist something up until the point where they know that they can win with it or they can use it somehow. It's not that they actually care. And I'm not saying that all Republicans are great either. I think that the Republican, there are a lot of like opportunistic, Republicans who will pick up an issue when it makes sense and when it's profitable, and maybe won't touch it when it's not. I think that that's something that every party does, but the Democrats right now, like they just seem to like, they don't, the point, I guess, is that there's this idea by people who support the Democrat Party that the Democrat Party actually cares, and that's why we want to support the Democrat Party. They care about the environment, they care about the poor. And in fact, one of the things that you commented on that I think just I don't think, but I'd be interested in your perspective. I don't think the majority of Democrat voters actually realize that they're the party of the wealthy now, and that the majority, like I think the data suggests that 80% of the wealthy donate to Democrats, and only like 20% are voting are donating to Republicans. This might have shifted a little bit, but with Trump, because I think a lot of people, I think there maybe it's like 70-30 with him, with the super rich, but just in general, your like wealthy neighborhoods and stuff like that are largely donating to Democrats. And just again, curious as to your thoughts if you think the average Democrat voter knows that.
No, I don't think so. I mean,
Yeah.
or do they care? I don't know. But no, that's completely the case now. Like when I first came to Maine, a lot of the wealthy neighborhoods, like say in southern Maine, were kind of, they were Republican.
Yeah.
And then I watched all that shift, and the Democrats are now, they're the laptop class. They're the party of Wall Street and pharma, and the wealthy. And like I said, MAGA is just this new way to, to kick the poor around, kick the working class around. So do they know it? I'm not sure. I feel like they think, and I've got real deep thoughts on that, but we don't have
So
time.
real quick, when I think when you say MAGA is the way, you mean the way that they're treating MAGA is right, is a way to kick the poor around, not MAGA itself.
Right. It's like,
Right.
now they have this label, and it's a permission for them,
Yeah.
because the Democrats have weaponized their empathy. I don't doubt there's lots of empathetic people in the
Absolutely.
Democratic Party, but their TDS has gotten them so hard that they'll say yes to everything. Like this trans issue, it's like that's an 80-20 issue. Like parents don't want their kids to be transitioned, with, they don't want their girl. In fact, one of my talked about, knowing people who are trans over the years, and I worked in the healthcare field for years in Portland, and I knew people who transitioned, and I had this friend who, back just like it only seemed like a decade ago, he had to like appeal to like a bench of clinicians in order, and he was trying all the time that I knew him to get transition surgery, an older adult guy, and he was trying all of his life, that I knew him, to get the go ahead to, to transition. Well, then that happened real fast. Like here he was, like trying to convince this bevy of psychiatrists that his body dysmorphia, he wouldn't regret his decision later on over his body dysmorphia, and now we're transing kids. And in fact, that guy, I saw him post on Facebook the other day. He said, "I don't want my granddaughters changing in the locker room with boys," and so it's not monolithic. Yeah, but it's the party of the laptop class, and that's one thing that brought me over to the Republican side and to the MAGA movement, because like I said, from my punk background, punk, was a working class ethos, and it's all become like, Apple laptop, white collar, laptop class people who've had their empathy weaponized, and then that's been ginned up by all the TDS, and now they're welcome to just call the working class MAGA, people who they never liked. They didn't, they looked down on them for being their lack of education. They look down on them for working with their hands and being tradespeople, and the people who make this country go, make this country run, who do the hard work, who get up and put your electric lines back up when your Wi-Fi goes down and your laptop fails. So yeah, so that's they're no longer the party of the working class. They're the party of Wall Street and pharma
Yeah.
and
But
and the solar and wind industry, you know.
yeah.
But they're making money hand over fist, you know.
Yeah, and like to the go back to the point, like I think most people, the majority of people who vote Democrat, probably they don't know that. They still think that. What was interesting is I went door to door because I ran in 22 and 24 here in Westbrook, a little bit tougher district than I think where you where you live.
I feel you, man.
But I remember going to this one woman's door, and I think TDS is an understatement for what she had, but. And I actually do think that, and I don't mean this like to be funny, but I think she actually had some mental issues, not because of which side she supported, but like it was like I was trying to have a rational conversation, and it just like it was a very irrational response on everything. But what was really interesting is she was sitting there telling me that like the Republican Party is the party of the wealthy, and I was basically saying actually like that's actually not the case. Like, and I cited all the big companies and all the money that they give to the Democrats, and she's like, well, that's because they care about the environment. It's like, wait a second. Like you didn't trust them, but now that they say they care about the environment, all of a sudden you're just going to believe everything they have to say. Like, do we trust the big corporations or do we not trust the big corporations? Don't you think that it's really likely that they're pretending to care about the environment when they really don't because they've seen a way to profit off of it? You think maybe that's going on? I like as I think the one of my favorite terms of the 20s. That's what I call this period of time. It's the 20s. I wish we'd gotten the roaring 20s, but instead I think we've got the raging 20s.
Yeah,
and
well, that I like that.
But like the 20s, it's just the cognitive dissonance that where people like that whole thing. She's like anti the Republican Party because the Republican Party is the party of the wealthy. But then when you point out that the Democrats are actually the party of the wealthy, she's like, well, it's because they care about the environment. It's like the irrationality of those two statements back to back is just mind bending. And there are just so many people that don't realize what's actually going on and what the Democratic Party is actually focused on, which is lining the pockets of again, as you said, big pharma, big war, military industrial complex, and big energy, but not in the traditional sense. So big green energy now, right? It's not about the oil companies, the evil Republicans with the oil companies. Now it's actually the green, quote unquote, green companies that, as you pointed out, as somebody who cares about the environment and was in the Green Party, that there are significant problems with these solar panels. Like, I mean, the fact that you were a Green and you cared about this and you were starting to introduce legislation about this is evidence. And now you're on the other side saying, I think we got some concerns here, right? Like, and you're not welcome within the party that supposedly cares about the environment, and now they don't care about these things. That's one of it. Just again, all this stuff just blows my mind. How people are just not
money, man.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And we need more people to know and understand what's actually going on here. And so I appreciate you, kind of sharing this, because your story, I think, is fascinating and is, I think, really helpful in the conversation. Because it's wild. And, you also, go ahead.
Well, to get on that part that you were talking about with the TDS and so forth, there's another shift. It's like, those people now are like the old Fox News Republicans, right? That's like, I see it so clearly. It's like, and it used to be kind of like, oh, there's your grandpa, on a steady diet of Fox News, and at the family dinner railing against, with all the latest Fox News talking points. Well, like, so now they've become that. They're bilking little old ladies. Everybody's pharmacalized. Everybody's screwed up. There's a lot of lonely people in their homes. And they're bilking these little old ladies for like their $5 donations a month, their $10 donations a month, which is amounted to a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know, it's a different way of fundraising, and they gin them up with the TDS, and they work on their, they work on their empathy, and it's kind of monstrous, really, and but again, that's how I used to see the Republican Party,
Mm.
you know. Not that, I've always looked at all news sources, because like I always want to know all different perspectives. I paint houses with a buddy, and he likes to listen to NPR, and I'm like, okay, well, I like any kind of political talk, but just to hear, NPR, I don't know, used to be maybe a little bit like you could get some straight news from them, but they're captured too. They're probably getting money from USAID, and they just pound these same talking points. So there's a convergence going on of working people on the left and the right. I feel the repository for that on the local level and on the national level has become the Republican Party. And so it just makes sense to me. I don't feel, you've heard lots of people on the left say, I consider myself a classical liberal, kind of libertarian. I'm just a freedom person. I'm for guns. I'm for the Second Amendment. I'm for the ability to defend myself against the government, to live my life the way that I want. That's the kind of classical liberal I am. That used to be the old hippie liberals, but
Yeah.
I've seen so many of those people who are lonely at this point in their life. They're like home alone. They, now everybody's on. We used to hang out, and now we're all on social
Yeah.
media, and everybody's just a sitting duck for this. We are in an asymmetric war at this point.
Yeah.
And it's and back in the 90s, when I was protesting, we were protesting against the WTO, Bush's New World Order.
Yep.
you know now the Democrats are all down with that, with world government, with New World Order, with open borders.
Yep.
The
With war.
Obama Obama had deported more people than his
Yep.
predecessors, illegal aliens, and then we just opened the border, and like people, their history is, because they don't teach history in schools anymore,
Yeah.
it doesn't occur to them, like, try to go to another country and stay there, and just stay there, and like take of their services. Go try it.
Yeah.
Like a lot of Democrats are like, I'm going to Canada, and then their whatever their equivalent of their Secretary of State is like, oh no, you don't come to Canada, we're not going to let you in, because they have a border, I guess.
And
And
they have laws and rules,
I,
and yeah.
yeah, I've visited in some other countries. You overstay your visa, boom. Next time you try to cross with your passport, you're out. And so yeah, it's a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of history. There's a lot of lonely people who are sitting dupes, and they've made them mad with TDS. And I don't know who's involved. I assume it's like, the same people who have always wanted world government, and that's why I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. And because this is the news, this is the media at this
Yeah.
point, obviously. And I've known that for a long time. And so, you know the establishment has completely captured everything. I mean, look how they behaved in
Yep.
COVID, and they still suppress all the news about all the injuries and so forth from COVID. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a no brainer for me at this point to be a Republican. The Republicans are the anti-establishment party. They're the party of punk rock. Um,
Like it.
and you're talking about minorities. They love their minorities until their minorities say, "Oh no, I voted for Trump. I'm MAGA now," because they're working class people who see that they're getting screwed by these hedge funds. They're getting put out of their housing, and now up in Augusta, you've got the Republicans saying, we need this money to fund emergency shelters for Mainers and to keep Mainers housed. And we can't be giving away all this general assistance in Portland endlessly to non-Mainers, to illegal aliens, to just like paying all their bills while there's an old lady down the road from me here who like can't afford her prescriptions that they just put a new tax on. Um, and they've taxed people's streaming services, for working people to come home and relax and like Netflix and chill. They've taxed that, so
Yep.
they don't care. They don't care about working people, and it's just bold face now. Their lack of concern for working people.
Well,
So yeah,
and
so
they're lying. I think
the Republican.
there's a representative. I would actually wanted to speak with somebody, because there's some rep, Democrat rep. I think they're maybe out of Falmouth or something like that. That was basically saying that there's this bill that was passed. There are no new taxes. That was one of the claims that she made. That she said that it was misinformation that suggests that there are new taxes in this spending bill.
Misinformation.
Yeah.
Misinformation. Oh
Misinformation is the
man.
new conspiracy theory, like before it was like to
Oh, I'm
delegitimize
proud to
something.
call me a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
Call me a conspiracy theorist. Like you flatter me, you know.
Yeah. Rather than being part of the mainstream media, I would rather be a conspiracy theorist, because they're actually literally lying to people, and that's what the Democrats are doing. And yeah, this new spending bill, which is interesting. I don't know if I'm sure you're aware, but I recently heard that there's going to be an effort. We need all hands on deck if we're going to have any in order to get it accomplished. But there's going to be an effort to repeal the 400-page spending bill that was just passed. And we need, as a citizens initiative, we need signatures. So we need people to be willing to collect. Are you doing anything with that, or?
I just found out about that yesterday. I was down at Boston Children's Hospital with my newborn son, and so I just heard about that yesterday. In fact, you remind me, years ago, the Democrats tried to bond the budget during the Baldacci administration, and I worked on referendums for years, and was pretty good. I ran teams to collect signatures and used to kill it with referendums, and I worked on a referendum to overturn that bond. And then the Democrats ended up relenting, and they didn't bond the budget, which is a wild thing to do. And so that was my earlier time working with Republicans, and all the Democrats were some pissed that I was like working on that campaign. So yeah, I'll work on that,
Yeah.
and everybody should go work on that, because that money is not going to Mainers. Right. They can't build an emergency shelter down in Sanford down the road from me, and the Democrats won't fund that, and the Republicans are like, let's fund this stuff. Let's take care of Mainers, And so
Yeah.
again, that shift. Whereas I think in the past, Republicans would have been like, oh, cancel all any kind of welfare programs, any kind of health programs, But since pharma, with their OxyContin back in the 2000s, and I watched all that happen in real time, and watched them continue to push and overprescribe this drug that turned everybody into opioid addicts. Now all of these towns, in the county and so forth, are decimated from pharma, from the opioid epidemic that they started with overprescribing OxyContin and pushing OxyContin, running shotgun with the Democrats to do that, and probably some Republicans back at the time. Now they have a great interest in social welfare programs, because that's all there is for their constituency at this point in those decimated towns. And pharma received some of the biggest criminal fines, the biggest criminal fines in history over the opioid epidemic. And everybody forgot about that. And everybody's like, oh, big pharma, big pharma was the most maligned industry out there, then, but somehow they use the whole MAGA thing. MAGA is anti-science. So if you're pro-science and you're smart, go out and get that shot to prove that you're smart and you're not anti-science like these MAGA, Well, and all the conspiracy theories, they all become truths in 6 months. And, so here we are, in a state that's been decimated by pharma, with the side that's supposed to be the compassionate side, not funding shelters, giving that money away to people that they want to replace us and take jobs that should be for young Mainers. I have a bill in to to have job coaches in the schools so that we can get kids into jobs. Whatever it is, working at Dunkin' Donuts. The kids are just sitting home alone. They talk about suicide rate for kids who can't get gender affirming care. The suicide rate in this country post COVID is up 50% among adolescents, historic highs.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure, I want to take care of those kids and
Yeah.
get them out in the community. And the best way to get in the community, let's face it, is in a job. That's how you interact with people. And but they'll just as soon jump over those kids and bring in 70,000 new migrants to take the working class jobs because they don't care about the working class.
They claim to, but then they pass bills that supposedly are about helping the working class. But what the end result is, I use the case from California because I think it's a great example, where they increase the minimum wage in order to help the working class at fast food places. And what ended up happening? 10,000 jobs lost. That's more extreme than you're going to see here in the state of Maine because we've got a lower population. But the point is, like, these policies that are supposedly and sound good and sound like they're helping the people end up leading to job loss because they're actually the reason that those smaller businesses and those places aren't paying those things is not because they don't care about their employees. It's not because they can afford it and they just are having fun living on their yacht. It's because the small business owners literally can't afford to pay them. And if you force them to have additional onerous regulations, such as the 1% payroll tax that came out for family medical leave and other taxes, because the family medical leave, the impact there is actually less the tax, even though that is a very onerous tax, and more like the impact to the person's business on having to, hold positions. That's just a whole nother story. But like all these things are actually causing businesses to close, and they're reducing the number of jobs that are available. And the jobs that are available, for the most part, the companies that are able to survive are your major corporations. And so like they're obviously doing the work of, it's another example of how they're captured. And I imagine that there are some of the Democrats that are in there fighting for this actually believe that what they're doing is helping make the world a better place, and they're just like closing their eyes and they're and putting in their, either putting their hands over their eyes and their fingers in their ears so they can't, and like clearly not seeing what the actual impact of this is, because if they did, I would imagine they would have to change their mind, but that's not something we see very often among Democrats these days, unfortunately. And when they do, we see, I use the national examples. When they do stand up, you've got Tulsi Gabbard, who was the darling of the left. She was the assistant chair of the Democrat Party. And then she started asking questions about things under the Obama administration. And they like slowly made her feel uncomfortable, pushed her out, and now she's a Republican. And some of her views have changed, but largely I think she's the same person, right? Then you have Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, these two people who were Democrats, but they've both left the Senate and left the Democrat Party because they were basically pushed out because they didn't agree with everything that the Democrat Party was pushing. They were pushed out of the party, and that's dangerous. And again, I'm not saying that this doesn't happen to some degree on the right, but it's like you literally can't step out of line if you want to be a Democrat. Whereas, as you've said, there's a lot of open conversation. We actually believe in free speech. We believe in a diversity of thought on the Republican side at this point.
It's true, I've been up there for a couple of months now, Chuck, and I haven't heard the Democrats say the phrase working class once.
Yeah.
That's because the Republicans are the party of the working class.
Absolutely. Yeah. Things have shifted. I mean, you go back to the Bush administration. I think a lot of your today conservatives are not fans of like what happened under the Bush administration. And, it was the party of big business, big war, all these things. And it's just shifted. And now the Republican Party is the party for the working class, for American citizens. Oddly enough, despite some other rhetoric, the Republican Party is also the party totality of women's rights, if you want to look at it holistically, we're seeing this.
And that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Holistically,
Yeah.
right? Because we want to defend Title
Yeah.
IX. I remember as a kid, Title IX it went on from the 70s to the 80s. There were still colleges who were not complying with Title IX. And then they turned around and added gender identity to Title IX and the ERA. The other day, I voted against the Equal Rights Amendment. There was a resolution on the floor of the House to support the Equal Rights Amendment. Well, I never would have voted against the Equal Rights Amendment in my life. I could have never imagined that I would have done that. But we can't agree what a woman is, Chuck.
Yeah.
That's the absolute state of things.
Yeah.
We can't agree what a woman is. But no, the Republicans are the party of the working class. They're the party of the diversity of opinion. They're the anti-war party. Look at how, when I was a kid, you were constantly hit upside the head with Russia. We used to prepare for a nuclear attack by getting that down underneath our desks, and when I was a punk rocker, we kind of made fun of that because that was the establishment line. We would wear our hammer and sickle shirts. Well, now I know what that means. I would never go near that again. And again, that was something with the Greens. The Greens started to, get into communism, and they got into, they got beset by trans things, and then free speech was dangerous. The Republicans are the party of free speech. They're the anti-war party. When I was a kid, and I remember hearing about, the different wars and reading about, isolationism. I remember thinking as a kid, I'm like, yeah, I'm an isolationist. I don't want us to be getting into wars all over the world on 70 different fronts or more that we don't even know about, with boots on the ground that we don't even know about. And then lo and behold, you got the Republican leader saying, I want to end war. I want peace, not monolithically across the board, right? But and then you get the Democrats like peace and anti-war, and like what happened to all these hippie Democrats who were like, they would like read everything on the label before they ate it, and now but they don't care that you can't read what's in the shots, that you don't know what's in there, and you're not and don't ask, to shut up, don't ask. It's crazy. But I'm here for it. I've been waiting for this convergence my entire adult life, and it's here. And I think whoever whatever elements have got us in this information war, this asymmetrical warfare that's going on, I really believe that's happening. That is this new media is the way to combat that. Local politics and localism is the way to combat that. I know it's boring as hell, boring, bro. But you got to get on the school boards. You got to work on local referendums. You can't just focus on stuff on the national level, because where the rubber meets the road with all that stuff is on your local school board. It's out in the streets and in the neighborhoods. That's where this is all going down right now. And so if you really want, when I went door to door this last time around, people were like, you voting for Trump? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm voting for Trump. They'd be like, that's all I need to know. But, I'm like, do you care about local stuff? Because that's where it all comes down. That's where you get taxed to the hilt. That's what affects you. That's what affects your kids. So, yeah, it's not exciting. It's boring to sit in hours of meetings. But if you've got, and I've heard so many people say, oh, I'm not the type of person to do that. I've got skeletons in my closet. And, just go do it, because nobody's coming to save you. And all these things are captured by these people with their raging TDS. I love that, man. The raging 20s.
Yeah, no, I agree. All that stuff. I think getting involved is what we need to do. And yeah, it's not exciting. It's kind of boring, but at the same time, we actually it's so fascinating. I remember I went door to door again. This was in 2022. I went to somebody's house and he's like, "Yeah, I only vote in presidential elections because that's when my vote makes the most difference." And I was like, I was a math major, so maybe not everybody understands math, but like the smaller the race, the more of a percentage, of impact your vote has, because it actually makes so much more of a difference than in your ward, for school board or for city council or whatever, than who you vote for president. You're like one of, 150 million, whereas like in your ward, the person may win with like 700 votes. Like obviously you have such a much more significant impact, but also like talk about the things that impact our kids. We've been talking about this a bit with school boards, is like the school boards, like even though Title IX has been pulled back, how that gets into the schools is through the school boards, right? And so this
It hasn't been pulled back on the high school level.
right.
There's no sign of that. The colleges said they'd comply, but they weren't. Apparently, they weren't out of compliance. And give Laurel Libby her voice back, because
Right.
she's standing up for women, and
Yep.
she's not
Yep.
even allowed to say what she's standing for. They kept her on a razor's edge. Oh, you just are trying to dox a kid and create hate, and that was your motivation. When we're not supposed to, on the floor of the House, you're not supposed to ascribe.
Nope. I think we might have lost you there, John. But yeah, Laura Libby speaking up was obviously huge, for the people of Maine. And yes, to John's point, Laurel was not there trying to dox anybody. That was not what it was about at all. It was about pointing out to people what was actually happening, and what's happening to our girls. So while I have this moment, we'll see if John joins back in, but I'll just remind you that, again, the reason that this podcast exists is to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on, but you have a part to play. Again, as we're talking about, you got to get involved. You got to run for school boards, or get involved in your school board, get involved in your local politics. That's where you have the most potential to have impact, and that the school boards, which are elected from the people in your towns, are the ones that actually determine whether or not the schools are following Title IX or not. So that is actually where you can get involved, and you can also get involved with this effort to overturn the budget that was passed. It's a majority budget, but a slim majority, and it's a very partisan budget. It didn't even communicate or engage with the Republicans to attempt a bipartisan budget. Just passed this, and now they're in quote unquote emergency session to finish the rest of their work, which will include more budgetary things. So we're going to try to overturn that. We need people to help collect signatures. We have a limited amount of time that we need to get these signatures by. So we're going to need your help. So stay tuned and get ready to be involved. In addition to that, this podcast is something that you can share with other people. There's a lot of really good information about what's really going on. I think John's story is one that needs to get out there. More people need to know, because there's a lot of really good information in it, and things like that. And there are also going to be shorter clips that we'll create and we'll post, and you can help by liking, sharing, subscribing to the podcast, so that more people are aware of what's happening in our state. I can't do it alone. I'm one person. This has to be a movement of the grassroots. If we want to win this information war, we have to get information out to the people of Maine about what's actually going on in our state. So I guess we're going to wrap up for now. John has not joined back in, and I'm not 100% sure what happened, but lost connection, or maybe his phone died. But thank him. I want to thank him for coming on and sharing his story, and for fighting for us in Augusta, and for all the other reps that are doing that for us. It's important to remember that they have to go through that. They are there fighting for us. I think some people wonder what they're doing, but they're there trying to push back against the radical agendas being pushed by the left. And we need to appreciate them and thank them, and join with them. Again, if you're frustrated about the Maine GOP, guess who's to blame? Well, it's everyone, and there are certain people that are again that hold more of the blame, but ultimately it's all of us. We need to work hard and fix our state and fix our GOP if we feel like there are problems with it. The best way to fix them is to get involved and communicate with people, and we have to talk with our friends and neighbors. Again, this is the action portion of this podcast. We have to have conversations with people who we don't agree with. Now, those conversations aren't easy. We don't necessarily always want to rush into telling people that they're wrong about things, but we have to have conversations. We have to have civil discourse, because without that, we're never going to be able to help people realize the truth of what's going on in our world. But you can help. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you all for watching. Again, like, share, subscribe. Feel free to check out my merch. I've updated it on X. There is under my website. You'll see a link to the merch where you can get stuff like this. The sweatshirt. There's also t-shirts. There's some stickers you can put on your computer or on the back of your phone or something like that. Bunch of fun stuff that you can purchase to kind of help support the podcast, so that, as I said earlier, so that I lose less money, because this is definitely not a for-profit endeavor. I don't anticipate it ever becoming one. That's not the point of doing it. But if I can lose less money, that would be better. And again, these types of things are great for talking points. People are like, "What's the Muddy Water Podcast?" And you can share about what we're trying to do and help educate the people. So thank you all, and we will see you back. I think I've got somebody coming on tomorrow. Oh yeah, former or not former, but somebody from the medical field. So we talked a little bit about that, who's going to share her story of working as, I believe as a nurse for somewhere around 40 years, and how she's seen the health care, as we sometimes call it, although it's more sick care. She's going to talk about how she's seen the healthcare system change from actually being more helpful to people to being what it is today. So tune in tomorrow, and I hope you enjoyed John's story. Please share. Thanks. Bye.